live stream.
You're live.
Great. Okay, folks, thanks. Hello, everybody. Thanks all for coming. We are about to get started. Um, yeah, thanks everybody for coming. Thank you. Thank you. So thanks. Okay, folks, thanks. Hello, everybody. Sorry. Thanks all for coming. We are about to get started. Okay. Sorry about that technical problem. And now? Okay. Third time lucky. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another International Manifesto Group webinar co-organized with a critical theory workshop on the subject of anti-imperialism in the Sahel. And we are, of course, focused in particular on the Alliance of Sahel States. My name is Radhika Desai. I'm the convener of the International Manifesto Group, and I will be moderating this event. Let me just start off with a few reflections and before going to our speakers. The third decade of the 20th century has witnessed a phenomenon that has taken most observers by surprise. We have witnessed a series of popular, patriotic military coups concentrated in Francophone Africa, which seem determined to challenge French and Western power. In 2023, faced with Western and French opposition and sanctions, three of the most powerful of these new governments cut ties with France and the West, forced the armed forces of the West and France to leave their countries, withdrew from the Economic Community of West African States, or ECOWAS for short, and formed the Alliance of Sahel States. The latter is a comprehensive military, economic, and political alliance to strengthen their economic and military capacities to resist Western intervention in the region and to pursue autonomous development that is aimed at popular well-being. Perhaps inevitably, given the configuration of power in the world today, they have also been forming ever closer links with Russia and China, while, as is widely reported in parts of the alternative media, Ukraine has entered the West African region on the side of France and the West. If these developments have surprised most of the world, it is less because they are surprising in themselves, as I wager our distinguished panel will tell us in no uncertain terms, than because the rest of the world has, as usual, not been paying much attention to Africa. In addition to the neglect of Africa, people are surprised because anti-imperialist forces in the post-war period have tended to focus on the power and practices of the United States, while France's imperialism, particularly in Africa, flies under the radar. French political and military intervention in its former African colonies and its imposition of the colonial CFR currency on them in order to ensure that their resources, including critical ones like oil and uranium, are available cheaply to France. And these, of course, have been, these two things, the French intervention and the CFR, have, of course, been clearly major factors behind the coups. There is an additional factor, which is that there is a jihadist threat that all these countries have been facing following the West's deposition of Colonel Gaddafi of Libya and the transformation of Libya into a festering den of jihadism, and that which has, of course, been threatening much of West Africa for the past decade and a half. Needless to say, Western intelligence agencies have long been cultivating these groups in the region in much the same way as they have done in Syria, Libya, Iran, Mozambique, and elsewhere, with the aim of undermining states that assert and protect their sovereignty against imperialism. The countries of the Alliance of Sahel States have chalked up at least one major military success. They have been successful in preventing Western-backed ECOWAS intervention in Niger. It also seems that their economic management has not only been popular but also effective in promoting growth, at least so far. Meanwhile, their nationalization agenda and vocal opposition to imperialism are attracting support throughout the continent and indeed throughout the world. Of course, many of us have been wryly noting how Ibrahim Traore has become something of a Che Guevara-like cult figure in our own time. So, how are we to understand these developments? What has been the structure of French imperialism in the region? How has it supported France and its relative autonomy and of course, strength and military, economic, and other types of strength within the Western Alliance and NATO? Why is French imperialism facing this formidable challenge now? What is the social nature of these patriotic coups? What is the social base on which they rest? What is their economic strategy? What challenges do their projects of popular and autonomous development face? How have they dealt with Western and French extractive multinationals? What roles are China and Russia playing? How is the Alliance of Sahel States positioned in the fast-changing geopolitical economy of our time? This is what our distinguished panel is here to tell us, and I'm sure we are all eagerly awaiting what they have to say. So we are going to start off with Ndongo Sambasila. Ndongo is a development economist, and I should say roving developmental economist, because depending on what time of year it is or whatever, he's based in Dakar or in various European locations and elsewhere. But I do know, and I've known Ndongo for a very long time, he's very immersed in understanding the politics and political economy of the region. So all the speakers will speak for about 12 to 15 minutes, and then we will open up for questions and answers. So, Ndongo, the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much, Fadika. I'm really pleased to be here among all of you. Thank you very much for this invitation. I will try to articulate my talk around this idea that what is happening in the Sahel is, and generally speaking, in Francophone Africa, is a kind of democratic backsliding. This has been a major headline, I mean, in the past years. Many analysts, many mainstream media were portraying what is happening in the Sahel as a retreat, from democracy. And I would like to argue that what is happening in the Sahel is a new wave of true decolonization, of true liberation, because most countries in Francophone Africa are still not independent, and they have to conquer that independence. And that is what has been going on in the Sahel. And to understand that, we have to go back from, let's say, the post-World War II. Because what happened at that period was that France was a relatively junior imperialist power, no leverage. I mean, no military leverage compared, let's say, to the United States or the Soviet bloc. It was not an industrial power like, let's say, Germany or Japan would become. It was not a financial power like, for example, the UK with the city, etc. So France had as only his own asset was the empire. And that was de Gaulle's bet. De Gaulle said, if France has to exist and has to have its so-called strategic autonomy, France has to leverage its own empire, that means the former colonies, especially in sub-Saharan Africa. And there were two things that were key to de Gaulle. The first is to have what it is called in French, the force de frappe, meaning that having the nuclear dissuasion power. And at the time, most of the, uranium sources were controlled, let's say, by the US, UK on one side, and also by the Soviet Union. And if France wanted to have this so-called force de frappe, France has to secure uranium supplies in Africa. And that's why France did its best to have control over Gabon, because Gabon was really uranium rich just before Niger. And France also had good relationships with apartheid South Africa, because Namibia had, uranium sources to some extent. And after it was Niger, just before the independencies. And so it was really important for France to become a nuclear power. And France achieved that through its own colonies. The other thing was that France was a weak junior power. and also wanted to have some leverage in a world dominated financially by the US dollar. And so for France, the economy of which was devastated after World War II, the issue was how to become competitive again because the economy was devastated, and how to have access to the resources of the colonies in its own currency, not in US dollar, and how to make up for the needed, foreign exchange that France needed for its reconstruction. And that's why after World War II, at 26 December 1945, they created the CFA franc. So the CFA franc is still existing, shared by 14 countries. 12 of them are former French colonies. But it allowed France at the time and until the arrival of the euro, a kind of exorbitant privilege. We are talking about the exorbitant privilege of the dollar, and France has a kind of localized exorbitant privilege within the CFA franc countries. That means France could buy on credit all of the goods and services coming from its own empire. And the other thing was that all of these countries, generally the empire, used to have trade surpluses with the rest of the world. That means that these countries were accumulating US dollars. And those US dollars were restituted to France in exchange of French francs, which were really weak, a weak currency, which had been devalued 10 times between 1948 and 1986. So that means that France could buy on credit, its imports from the franc zone, and also could use the foreign exchange, accumulated by these countries for its own economic development. That was what the CFA franc allowed France. And that's why at the time of independence, France never wanted to concede independence. It was forced to do so because at one point you have the Indochina War, you have also the Algerian War, and also there were many movements of liberations in Africa, and France did not want to have another war that it could not sustain. That's why France anticipated that and created what was called the community, meaning that you will remain within the empire, but without independence. That was the deal. But in 1958, when de Gaulle came back and they had this new constitution, the fifth constitution, the current constitution of France, all of the colonies of the empire in Africa said, we don't want independence except for Sékou Touré. But when Sékou Touré said in 1958, we have to conquer our independence, this was the beginning of the end, let's say, of the former French empire. So in 1960, all of the other countries would gain their independence. But this was an independence without sovereignty because France told the new leadership there, if you want to have independence, you have to sign a number of agreements. And all of these agreements are variable. It was called cooperation agreements. And so France, the deal was, you will have your independence, but no sovereignty, for example, on your natural resources, over your education system, over your currency in matters trade, etc. For example, if countries like Gabon, etc., wanted to sell their uranium, their strategic resources elsewhere, they had to first have the authorization from France. And all of this was signed legally. So that means that at the time of independence in 1960, except for Sékou Touré in Guinea, who was a trade unionist, so he has a different background, and Sylvanus Olympio in Togo, for most of the others, the elites, they were chosen by France, by the French leadership. So these were more or less, loyal subjects to the French. So this is a story, with my colleague Fanny Pigeot, we document it, we call it a story of electoral imperialism. But since the French Revolution, there have been, elections in the former French colonies. And France has always used its imperial right to choose who should rule, these former colonies and and territories under its domination. To say that from the time of independence, 1960, most of the people in power, except for those two, Sékou Touré and Sylvanus Olympio, they were loyal to the French. And when you look at that story from 1960 to now, you would see that, in fact, there had never been a regular election which helped elect someone opposed to the system of French imperialism. We call in French, France-Afrique. There had never been. The only exception was 2024, March 2024 in Senegal. That was the first time for 16 countries that you had a regular election that helped elect people who were at least opposed to France-Afrique. Before, we never had that. We had people who were loyal to France-Afrique, and generally they came through rigged elections, or they just stayed in power. And the only time you had anti-imperialist leaders in power was people from the military. I'm not saying that the military are progressive by nature, but the only time you had anti-imperialist progressive leaders in power, in fact, they came through military coups. That was the case of in the Republic of Congo in the mid-1970s with Mayangurabi. He was the communist. He was killed. That was also the case of Thomas Sankara in Burkina Faso, 1987. He was killed. In Madagascar also, you had a very short reign of another military, also communist, also killed in power. So those were the only instances where you had anti-imperialist leaders coming to power. But that means that through normal elections, you could never have, anti-imperialist leaders committed, to national sovereignty, internationalism, and so on. And so that, but the situation changed from the 2020s in the Sahel. It's the first time that you have three countries, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, creating an alliance against French imperialism. This is something really unique in the history of the former French colonies. So you have three anti-imperialist leaders uniting to say that we want to end French imperialism. So what is happening in the Sahel is a move towards true decolonization. And as Radhika said, these countries removed French troops and French military bases, and they did the same with the US. And also they have started to accept more control over their resources, natural resources. For example, if you take the case of uranium, there is some scholarly literature there, and you could see that the French used even to declare the uranium of Gabon as their own, uranium, not for Gabon, but as their own. And this country did not used to have good prices on the uranium. The former Chinese ambassador in Niamey, Niger, used to joke that it's very strange that after more than 40 years, Niger collects less export income from uranium compared to onions. And this was not a joke, and you could see that in the actual data, official data published, for example, by the central bank. For many years, Niger received more from onion exports than from its own uranium. So these countries have started to nationalize part of their resources and to claim, better deals, better mining deals. For example, Mali has done that, for example, for the gold sector. But the other thing to say that is that these coups are not a move towards, what is called democratic backsliding, because all of these coups, they have a history. The 16 countries that were formerly in the French franc zone, or that currently belongs to the French franc zone, that using the CFA. These 16 countries are the world champions of military coups. Since 1960 to 2023, there have been at the world level 375 successful military coups. That means that led to the overthrow of the current government. And the 70 happened in those countries, the 16. And you could compare that with the rest of Africa, it was 160. But coups are not something pathological, because when nations grow, young nations, sometimes they go through a period of instability. And you could see, for example, in Latin America, when they had the independence in the 19th century, they had many military coups. But for most African countries, after the end of the Cold War, there were no longer any military coups for most of the African countries. The same coups happened in the same countries. And since NATO, the UK, the US, the France, they destroyed Libya, there have been 90 coups since between 2011 and 2023. And 15 out of the 19, they happened in North Africa and in the Sahel. So that means that the NATO destruction of Libya has destabilized this zone and had lasting consequences. Amid, neoliberal policies, followed by government that were were under, Western domination. They were portrayed as democracies, but they did not create the type of economic performance, expected by the people. That's why when this military coup happened, all of them were really popular, and they are still popular. And you could see, for example, there had been an opinion survey by the German Social Democrat Foundation called the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung. It's a kind of annual surveys covering, most of the biggest cities in Mali. And that survey concludes that, the regime in Mali is very, very popular, very, very popular. You could see it. Generally, the opinion rate is more than 80%. Often it's 90% on many questions. So often you will see in the media that these countries are not democratic, they are not popular, etc. But this is a caricature. But when you ask the people, they trust their government, and they see that this is really their government is leading them towards liberation from French neocolonialism and Western domination generally. And you could see that through independent opinion surveys. Afrobarometer also, when you read some of their surveys on Burkina Faso, you would find the same conclusions. But because these are anti-imperialist coups, they face, very harsh sanctions. There had been coups in Gabon, coups in Guinea, but they did not face sanctions. Why? Because these coups, did not change the system at all. It was a kind of, starting anew the system of France-Africa, of French domination. That's why they were not, they did not have sanctions against these countries. But in the case of Mali, Niger, and Burkina, you had very harsh sanctions. And some sanctions, they put it, on behalf of the ECOWAS, the Economic Community of West African States, which, gathers the 15 countries of West Africa. But some of these sanctions are not from ECOWAS. They are from France, clearly. Why? Because in January 2022, when there had been this new coup by Assimi Goïta, they said that the ECOWAS would sanction Mali. And part of the sanctions was that they would freeze all their assets in what they say the central banks and other financial institutions of West Africa. But you see, there's this concept of monetary sovereignty. When you have your own currency, no one could ask your central bank to deprive you access from your own bank accounts and, do your regular payments as a government. But in the case of the CFA franc, these countries, they do not have their own central bank. They have a common central bank. And this common central bank is legally under the control of the French treasury. When I say legally, because they are agreements, legal agreement. And so the Malian government could no longer have access to its own accounts at the central bank. The banks in Mali could no longer have access to refinancing from the central bank. They could no longer have access to their own reserves, so they could no longer make any payments, and they have to default on their debts. This could only happen when you don't have your own currency, because when they make these sanctions, Guinea also, there was a coup in Guinea, but Guinea has its own currency, so they could not implement the same sanctions in Guinea because Guinea has its own currency. So these sanctions were clearly neocolonial, and they were implemented, under the aegis of France. And recently, there has been a court ruling saying that these sanctions were totally illegal because they have no legal basis. And at that time, I have written with my colleague, franc, to say that they have no legal basis to these sanctions. These are neocolonial sanctions. And these neocolonial sanctions applied only to coups which were not, liked by the West and especially by France. And now France and the US, they are very powerful, in ECOWAS. That's why these three countries, Mali, Burkina, and Niger, they said, we are going to exit from ECOWAS because this is an organization that has been captured by imperialist powers. So we could no longer, work with you. That's the situation. Because because there are some people saying, oh, this is a move against Pan-Africanism. It's not a move against Pan-Africanism. The three IS countries, they are trying to show a new path for Pan-Africanism. A Pan-Africanism premised on liberation from all form, of external privilege. So that is really what is happening in the Sahel. And I would say that what is happening, these type of coups are not a retreat, from democracy. It's a move forward, in terms of liberation. So I think the perspective should not be democracy in a bourgeois liberal sense, but liberation. There are many contradictions within this process of liberation. Maybe during the discussions we could talk about it. For example, they are still advised by neoliberals, and they have very, conservative, macroeconomic policies. But still, they have taken really important steps towards their own liberation. So I will stop there, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ndongo. That was really a very excellent way to start us off, laying the background so beautifully. Our next speaker is Rob Lemkin. Rob Lemkin is I would say, a really important anti-imperialist documentary maker who has made documentaries for BBC, Channel 4, ITV, particularly about Africa, but also about other topics, including a celebrated one about Cambodia. So, Rob, please take it away. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Radhika. And I'm hoping that Carlos can release me so I can show my pictures. And I think, are the pictures now showing? Yes, hopefully they are now showing.
Yes, they are.
I feel, thank you. I'm very honored to be in this panel and a bit humbled, to be honest, because I follow and read a lot of the people on this panel and learn a lot from them. And I by contrast, am not so sort of well informed on the overall, but I can maybe speak a little bit about the film and the work that I have been doing in Niger since 2015. And you have a headline, you've got a picture up there on the screen called with images of African Apocalypse, which was the film that I made about the French colonial invasion of Niger in 1899, which was made as a BBC film, but then was remade. And the image on the left of the screen is when it was remade in Hausa, which is one of the principal languages in Niger, and re-released there. And it's still on release in West Africa in that version in Hausa in French. The film has become, I suppose, not just, and I should say that I'm working on another film related to the same subject, but the film is not just a film in itself, because out of the process of making the film has come a case for reparations that has been formed by a group, which I'll just talk about in a minute or two, of people who were involved in making the film and doing the research. I'll go on to the next screen, which shows the map of, well, actually there's two maps there, but that's the map of Niger. That's from the Foreign Office, the British Foreign Office, and the map of Niger as of 2015, when I went to Niger for the first time, and we've worked there from then until the present day, showed that there's a yellow area along the border between Niger and Nigeria, which is where the French colonial invasion passed through. And it was one of the most violent. Of course, all colonial invasions were very violent, but this one was particularly violent and intense, and involved the killing of tens of thousands of people and the destruction of huge numbers of livelihoods and areas. And it was essentially a contest between France and Britain over who would control the land between the River Niger, or Niger, and Lake Chad. And as we passed and as we did our research along the borders, I'm sort of passing my kind of mouse here along just to sort of show you the areas that we were working along. This was the path that the French had taken as they came through communities and destroyed everything that they found in their sight. And this was the same route is now the kind of the national highway, Route Nationale 1. So it's La Une, it's the main highway of the country, and it's exactly the same route that the French imperial mission went through. So as we went through, we met communities that had very deep memories of this 1899 period. Of course, nobody in 2015 or today was alive back in 1899, but the collective memory was extremely vivid and extremely intense. And one might say the transgenerational trauma was kind of was continuing. Partly, I think, really focused on this event because, in a sense, it was in this period in 1899, the first 6 months of 1899, when this military expedition took place, that really these parts of Niger, which were the most populated parts, were integrated into the French colonial system, and then were, as a result, became utterly impoverished, utterly de-developed or underdeveloped, or whatever you might want to say, and life went backwards for the entire population here, and continued going backwards. And Dongo has already mentioned uranium, and certainly for us and the people that I was working with, the Nigerian people, the communities that we work with, the uranium issue and the continued exploitation of uranium from Niger by French parastatals, originally Arewa, or maybe another company originally, but by now it's called, or more recently before the coup, it was called Orano, and that's still in place. Although it's now been that company has been removed in terms of its operations from Niger, but that's a contested removal, and there are legal kind of actions. The mining company is suing the Nigerian government for breach of contract, etc., etc. But this feeling that Niger, that uranium was being taken from Niger, and that Nigerians were getting nothing from it, and that France, of course, France's electricity grid has relied very heavily in the past, and even until quite recently, on Nigerian uranium. But it's also important to note that the entire of France's military nuclear program relies totally on, or has relied totally on, Nigerian uranium up until the coup of July 2023. So that's entire military uranium is sourced for the French program, is sourced from Niger, but less than 10% or around 10% of rural Niger is electrified. So you have this huge kind of contrast. Some people are, as understandably, completely angry about that. So as a result of the film that we made and the work that we did, the communities got together, and this is a slide from a hearing that was held. This was about the third hearing that was held. The first hearing was held online in New York with the special rapporteur at the United Nations, who was inquiring into colonial violence and colonial crimes. And time went on. Lawyers were appointed in London, Doughty Street barristers representing a woman called Jelia Sane, who is a British Senegalese lawyer, and later on another lawyer called Jennifer Robinson, who is well known, or has been well known, as the barrister for Julian Assange. They have taken on the case, and they represent this group, which is in English the Niger Communities Group on Reparatory Justice for Colonialism, and they have brought what they call a complaint to the United Nations and to through the Special Rapporteur for the Promotion of Truth and Justice. It's quite a slow process, but eventually the final documents were submitted in last year in 2025 in around April, and France replied, as also did Niger, to say that they were, and you can see here's the Guardian reporting it, France signals willingness to discuss reparations for colonial massacres in Niger. And in France, the same story is reported with a certain amount of, maybe a little bit slightly more coolly, because the French government, while it was open to the possibility of discussing some form of reparation in relation to, for example, the restitution of artifacts and so on, stolen heritage and so on and so forth, relatively safe, one might say, areas of negotiation and contest. It was certainly not interested in discussing the possibility of an apology or an acknowledgement or any kind of truth commission on not just what had happened in 1899, but what had happened between 1899 and 1960, which is when French formal colonial rule ended. So they weren't really prepared to go that much further. However, what happened as a result of that was that I think the community campaign began to get a kind of quite a lot more traction and confidence in Niger itself. So while the French had given this slightly sort of half-hearted response, which was sort of opening the door in some ways. Of course, it has to be said they were also only opening the door to what they would say was, rather than dealing with community action, they would only really deal with the state. And they then also went on to say that because the state is no longer in dialogue with us, because the state has expelled the military presence of France, it's expelled the mining presence of France, and it's expelled the diplomatic presence in France. Therefore, there's no dialogue between the French state and the Niger state. So in a way, France was kind of agreeing to have a dialogue on the basis of there not being any there only being possibility for that to happen. So meanwhile, in Niger, I think the confidence in the issue became greater. The group that you can see sort of in these images, the group or members of the group that was formed to make the claim kind of appeared on the main TV shows and put their arguments about why they wanted reparations and what they wanted reparations to achieve. And it should be important to say that this isn't really about money, or of course money would be a nice thing, but it wasn't. It's really about power, and it's really about the acknowledgement of wrong and the acknowledgement of what has been done with a view to restoring a new type of arrangement. In the right-hand corner, you have the Prime Minister of Niger, Ali Lamine Zain, who integrated into his speech at the General Assembly the issues of the case. And this kind of thing, I think, is now, as I say, sort of becoming more significant in terms of the politics and the force that's going on in relation to where the AES revolution, we might say, is going. And then in small ways, changes have been made in the sense that you can see down on the right-hand side, you have the Avenue Sarkin Koni. That Sarkin Koni means the king of Koni. And he was the person who resisted the French back in 1899. So a road has been named after him, and that this person here is the current Sarkin or Sultan of Koni, and he's his great grandson. And this is a kind of a part of a process, of course, a limited process, but it is part of a process that's going on. I think that as basically the Niger government sort of stays in power and sort of remains on this sort of remains strong. Of course, in the last few days, there have been very, very serious attacks against it, and those, for the time being, have been repelled. But there's been an Islamic an attack that's been claimed by the Islamic State in the last day or so, and that was quite an intense attack at the capital in Niamey. But even at the BBC, and you have a reporter here called Paul Melly, who would tend to be sort of not in favor of the Niger government, he is having to sort of acknowledge the fact that actually Niger is playing quite a smart move here and working with the Russians, and the Russians to give them their due as well, are reading the political lines quite well in Niger, and seeing that the desire for decolonization, as Dongo's talking about, is very, very deep, and is not just sort of something that's kind of tokenistic or temporary. It's a very, very deep. It's a very, very deep matter. And what I wanted to sort of touch on a little bit in talking about now is just something that we've done as sort of following this film, and I'll come back to the case very briefly at the end in a minute. But I think at the same time as while we have these military governments that are coming in, there is a sort of beginning of a move to sort of look at the history of decolonization and decolonizing politics and anti-imperialist politics in Niger. There have been other articles, but I'm just kind of showing pictures here that are related to ones that I'd worked on with my colleague Sidi Bilan, who's a Nigerian professor based in London. And when one of these articles was published, in fact, the original article was published, the version of this article was published on the Friends of Socialist China website, Quiet Please, We're Decolonizing, which is the title in French, Silence on décolonise, in title of the autobiography of Djibo Bakri, who was the anti-colonialist leader of in Niger in the 1950s, and actually was the prime minister of the country until he was overthrown when the French still controlled the country before independence. And his movement, Sawaba, which was a socialist movement and wanted genuine liberation, was forced underground at the time of independence, and was expelled. Largely, the people were dispersed from the country, and they attempted to make a kind of an invasion of the country and take control of it, but they were unable, and there was massive repression. A lot of people were rounded up and killed, and really everything in that regard was over in Niger for quite some time. I'm cutting here to this film and this book called Salayunya, which was a book and then a film made by one of the leaders of Sawaba, who had been put in prison and then wrote this novel. And this is a novel. It's coming back to the film that I made. This is a novel about a woman who called Queen Salayunya, who resisted the French back in 1899. So having failed to take power in the 1960s with Sawaba, he turned while in prison to writing novels, and he created this historical novel, which was really about the resistance of the Nigerians and against the French. Of course, it was ultimately a kind of a failed resistance, but in a way, maybe it wasn't a failed resistance, because that same resistance is coming back now. It's coming back in a very, very strongly felt way, and is very much part of what's kind of going on there at the moment. The area where the sort of in the area at the middle of the Sahel, you have in the AES countries, you've got three countries: Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. And this sort of triangle of area is an area of the moment where it's very unstable, but there was something that happened, and that one of the kind of the epicenters of that is a place called Terra, and there in about maybe 2 or 3 years ago, maybe longer, there was a certain amount of resistance to what the French were doing, because the French were still in place, and then there were a number of people that were killed there. And so it's an area where there is a lot of instability. There's a lot of what's described as jihadist insurgency, but historically it's an area where people have been quite resistant. And it's an area where, in this article, my colleague Femi Nylander and I were talking about the fact that it's a place where the Terra Declaration was made in the 1980s, and that's Thomas Sankara, and that's Seni Kouchi, who was the president of Niger at the time, and they made a very important statement about their declaration of non-alignment in the 1980s. Of course, as Radhika and Dongo have mentioned, Sankara was later killed. But this is all part of what's going on in Niger at the moment, and where the contest is. There's some more stuff that sort of indicates the return to this story about colonial history, which of course is what I'm more involved with. And I really wanted to sort of talk about this for 1 minute or so, if that's left to me, which is just to say that the case goes on, and the lawyers are now going to the higher courts inside the United Nations, and also in the African Court on Human Rights. But I think more importantly, it's the actual political organization and campaign group, and the campaigning within Niger and within the diaspora, and the organizing that's going on around that. So in a way, there's a legal campaign, but there's also a political and it's sort of advocacy kind of campaign that's going on. And I think it's a process that's building kind of quite strongly, I think, and very excitingly. And that is my small snapshot of obviously a much larger process that's going on in Niger, with, as I say, huge contests going on, even as we speak, with violent attacks in Niamey airport just this week. But I would like to come back to Mamani, who I mentioned before was the leader of the socialist group, and quote from one of his poems, which some of you might be familiar with, because it was quoted a certain amount at the time of the coup in 2023. And this is a poem, Espoir. It's in French. He wrote in French, but I read it to you in translation. And he's talking, so I'll just read it. He says, "Come, my brothers, let us walk in the footsteps of freedom, from refusal to revolt, from revolt to revolution, Let us break the back of contempt. Let us shatter resignation. And I think that phrase, let us shatter resignation, really does resound at the moment amongst the communities and the sort of political organizers and the activists in Niger. And that's what I'm kind of proud to be a very small part of. And thank you very much for listening to me.
Thanks so much, Rob. That was absolutely wonderful. Of course, looking at those amazing pictures always helps. And of course, you're speaking from your personal experience and commitment was very inspiring. Thank you so much. Our next speaker is Miriam Kane. Miriam is the founder of the Black Liberation Alliance, a relatively new organization, but a very interesting one. That is committed, that is a revolutionary collective of colonized peoples from the global south, which works on the principles of anti-racism and anti-imperialism. And they also do a lot of work, including, of course, make podcasts. So Miriam, please go ahead. The floor is yours. Miriam, can you get on? Yeah, very good, very good. Yeah.
Better?
Yeah, that's better.
Yeah, thanks so much, Sarika. Amazing. For having the Black Liberation Alliance join you guys today. Yeah. I'm actually Nongo. I don't know.
Miriam, do you want to? I mean, I know you're probably
have written a amazing book.
Sorry to interrupt, Miriam, but we can barely hear you. Maybe don't even try to show the photo. Yeah. Maybe just, yeah, that's it. Maybe just try the voice. Sorry about this, but I think that given Miriam's connection, it might be the best solution.
Yeah. Is that better?
Go ahead, Miriam. And just please start again, because we really couldn't hear you.
Okay. Wow. Are you guys able to hear me better like this?
Just about. You're still breaking up a bit.
Okay. With my phone, maybe.
Maybe if you can try and fix it, okay? And Miriam, if you send me your WhatsApp, I'll pass it on to Paul and see if he can WhatsApp you and you can sort it out at all. But one way or the other, we'll come back to you. You can go live, because I think we only have. Let me just double check. But we only have. Sorry, 1 second. Yes, so maybe we can come back to you after Gabriel. Do you think that might be a good idea?
Yes, I don't know if you can hear.
Yes. So maybe just direct message me your number and I'll pass it along to Paul, or direct message it directly to Paul. Either way, Paul Graham. Okay, so while Miriam hopefully will fix her problems, can I just introduce the speaker that would have gone after her, but will go now, and that's Gabriel Rockhill. Gabriel, of course, is probably known to many of you. He's been on our podcasts before. He's the founding director of the Critical Theory Workshop, author of the recent Who Paid the Pipers of Western Marxism, and many other very penetrating works besides. And Gabriel, although he normally works on very high theoretical issues, has been paying a lot of attention to the Sahel, and was, and of course, his Critical Theory Workshop has co-organized this webinar with us. So Gabriel, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Radhika, and thank you to all of the other organizers and speakers. It's an honor to be here, and I'm glad that we're platforming this. I know, Radhika, the planning for this goes back almost not quite a year. And so it's nice to see it come together. And I hope that there'll be more both intellectual and political work on this important region. So the Alliance of Sahel States, or the AES, has changed the landscape of West African politics to such an extent that it raises essential questions for the global anti-imperialist struggle. With the emergent multipolar world and the rise of the global south, and especially the east, it appears that there is now space being opened for alternative developmental projects outside of the imperialist-dominated world. Only a few years ago, when French imperialism was much stronger, as well as the imperial core in general, the objective conditions made the emergence of such a project less likely. However, due to the continuing rise of China as a global powerhouse with all of its extensive international development projects, as well as the repositioning of Russia on the global stage as an oppositional force to the imperial core, not to mention all of the important ongoing global South liberation struggles, the balance of power has been shifting. Although Russia is an important geostrategic ally, building on the history of Soviet support for anti-colonial movements across the continent, China is the African continent's biggest trading partner. This means a number of important things. First of all, there has been an exponential growth in trade between China and Africa. It has grown from $10 billion in 2000 to over $200 billion in 2020. Secondly, China has become one of the major investors in Africa, financing a large number of projects, including in the mining, petroleum, and agricultural sectors. Thirdly, China offers low interest or no interest loans to African countries. This has created developmental opportunities that are markedly different than what the dominant imperial powers have offered. Many other global South projects of national development and liberation have also been important. Cuba, which I'll return to at the end of my talk, is playing a particularly important role. It is within this space that the emergence of the AES must be understood, which is to take nothing away from the subjective contributions of the peoples of Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali. On the contrary, in coming together in an anti-imperialist alliance, they are arguably occupying a leading position in global class struggle, demonstrating to the rest of the continent and the planet that sovereign projects of national development can and need to be advanced against the imperialist powers. They're finding creative new ways of developing Pan-African solidarity in the era of late imperialism. One essential question that my presentation will raise concerns the relationship between the AES's endeavor to break the chains of imperialism and the prospects of developing socialism or at least socialistic measures. Are these best understood as national bourgeois development projects overseen by progressive sectors of the military? And do they therefore risk following a trajectory similar to other such endeavors in the past, potentially simply plateauing or even declining as bourgeois national development endeavors? Or is there the potential for the further advance of popular revolutions that put the means of production in the hands of the working population or their delegates, shore up relations with China, Cuba, and other socialist countries, and advance toward a more explicitly socialist horizon? Given the historical impact of Thomas Sankara, the so-called Che of Africa, on Burkina Faso, and his ongoing presence as a symbol of the current leadership, or for the current leadership, this question is particularly pressing in the case of what is referred to as the land of the upright people. It is interesting to note in this regard that links are being forged between Eritrea and the countries of the Sahel. Eritrea fought the longest guerrilla liberation struggle on the African continent and gained its independence in 1991. It set itself on the difficult course of socialist development under the leadership of Isaias Afwerki. Cooperating closely with the People's Republic of China and the Russian Federation, it has made some important gains while also facing numerous setbacks due to the imperialist hybrid war undertaking against it. It nonetheless represents an important socialist touchstone on the continent, and it can thereby serve as a significant ally if the AES moves in an increasingly socialist direction. Now, one of the important factors for understanding the AES, and Ndogo touched on this, as well as in his excellent work with Fanny Pigeaud, among others, the AES has to be situated in relationship to the evolution of French imperialism in the wake of the nominal political independence of its African colonies in the mid-20th century. Intent on maintaining economic subservience and a relationship by which Europe could continue, in the words of Walter Rodney, to underdevelop Africa, France reconstructed its imperial dominion via a neocolonial framework called France-Afrique. This term refers to the ongoing predominance of French imperial interests on the African continent through mechanisms such as the following: the political control that Ndogo went into in some detail, so I'll leave that aside. Military intervention. Of course, France has repeatedly intervened militarily in African countries, ostensibly for stability and democracy, but ultimately to protect French strategic and economic interests. Economic exploitation. This has taken the form of French privileged access to African resources, labor, and markets. And the neocolonial model of France-Afrique has been deeply institutionalized. And one of the clearest examples is the CFA franc, which is used in 14 African countries, with the 15th actually tied directly to it. Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali are, of course, 3 of these countries. And it means that France requires that all of these countries deposit 50% of their currency reserves in the French treasury, and the currency's value is pegged directly to the euro, so individual countries cannot adjust exchange rates to stimulate industrial development. All of this means that Paris makes all of the important decisions concerning the CFA franc, including determination of its value. As Ndongo with Fanny Pigeot have explained, quote, France is thus the only country in the world that directly manages currencies that are in principle distinct from its own. And more than just a currency, the CFA franc still allows France to organize its economic, monetary, financial, and political relations with a number of its former colonies according to its interests. In short, it is France-Afrique's best weapon. And one of the major questions is whether or not the Alliance of Sahel States can escape from the economic stranglehold of the CFA franc. So due to frustration with the decades of neoliberal and neocolonial pillage, as well as governmental mismanagement and foreign interference, it's important to note that a series of mass mobilizations preceded the coups in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. This is in the period between 2017 and 2022. There was also widespread concern with a lack of security, due in large part to the spread of terrorism. This was, of course, in the wake of the 2011 imperialist intervention in Libya, the overthrow of Gaddafi, leading to terrorist groups that are supported by the imperial powers who have wreaked havoc throughout the region. These public mobilizations eventually led to coups d'etat in all 3 countries that were led by the military but supported by popular movements. May 2021 in Mali, September 2022 in Burkina Faso, and then July 2023 in Niger. These military governments are distinct in many ways from the previous ones in the region in at least 3 significant ways. One is the class origins and ideological orientation of the coup leaders. Many of them come from the working or peasant classes. Second, the active participation of popular organizations and mobilizations, as I just mentioned. And third, their development of an endogenous Pan-African anti-imperialist national program. It's important to note in this regard, and here I'm drawing on the work of Samir Amin, and in particular his book, Class Struggle in Africa, that the development of a non-rural proletariat is still completely embryonic in West Africa. The general lack of industrialization has instead produced a different class stratification within the urban population. Quote, the ordinary people of West African towns is composed of small officials, businessmen, workmen, and employees, plus the innumerable parasites whose existence is favorized by the traditional family system and, of course, a false proletariat or semi-permanent unemployed, end quote. Colonization produced a class of minor functionaries, historically confined to inferior positions. This has led Amin to the following conclusion. Considering the state of backwardness of the peasant masses and the almost total absence of a proletariat, this group of minor functionaries was for a long time almost the only one to have an anti-colonialist conscience. It is useless to regret that the proletariat did not exist to play its part. The fact is that the social class begotten by colonialism, which had the mission of liquidating its domination, was not the proletariat, but this class of functionaries, end quote. What Amin's analysis raises as an important question is the specificity of the class formations in West Africa and the revolutionary potential of different segments. As military-led popular revolutions, we are obviously dealing with developments that are quite different from the idea that the industrial proletariat should serve as the vanguard of revolutionary transformation. Now, by February 2022, Mali had expelled French diplomatic and military forces and withdrawn from regional security partnerships. Burkina Faso and Niger have since done much the same, and in 2023, the AES was formally established. One of the first objectives of the AES was to set up a joint military force capable of orchestrating a coordinated response to the spread of terrorism. For the sake of security and self-determination, the AES countries banded together in a common defense pact aimed at reinforcing sovereignty. In September 2022, to take but one example, 40% of Burkina Faso's territory was under ISIS Sahel and other extremist groups' control. The Sahel Joint Force, or Force Conjointe du Sahel, has since registered successes in securing certain areas and neutralizing armed terrorist groups. One of the greatest successes has been the organization of joint operations that have destabilized terrorist sanctuaries in long uncontrolled border regions. The AES is not only a military and political project, however. It is also aimed at the development of common infrastructural projects such as the building of highways and railroads and the improvement in the access of regional and international markets. This involves removing trade barriers, simplifying customs procedures, and harmonizing technical and health standards. The AES has developed special economic zones and regional supply chains to facilitate the exchange of goods and services while creating opportunities for local businesses. These forms of South-South commercial exchange aim at loosening, if not breaking, the chains of imperialism and fostering greater economic sovereignty. For the sake of time, I'd like to conclude by just focusing on one of the countries in the Alliance of the Sahel States, the one that has arguably been lifting the torch of Thomas Sankara higher than any of the others, and that is Burkina Faso. Its current leader, Ibrahim Traoré, says he takes inspiration directly from Sankara, the president of Burkina Faso from 1983 until his assassination in 1987. Sankara was a Marxist aligned with the revolutionary orientation of countries like Cuba and Nicaragua, and his government made a series of important advances in healthcare, housing, transportation, education, literacy, agrarian reform, women's equality, ecology, and more. The Sankara-aligned Apollinaire Kielem de Tambela, who is connected to communist and left-wing organizations, served as Traoré's prime minister until his dismissal in December 2024. Now, in a little over 3 years, Burkina Faso, under Traoré's leadership, has made a number of significant gains that I'm just going to go through very quickly. Military and political sovereignty. Burkina Faso has taken back much of the military control of the country. The French military has been expelled, and there's been a recruitment drive to reinforce the military. Geopolitical reorientation. Burkina Faso has pivoted away from the imperialist powers and is increasingly collaborating with Russia and China, as well as countries across the global south. National development. Through a process of nationalization and national development, the country has been making economic advances visible in its rising GDP. It's nationalized 2 gold mines, approved construction of its first gold refinery so that the refinery can be done locally. It's established its first pharmaceutical production plant. It launched 2 tomato processing units and a new flour mill. It reopened the iconic Faso Fani textile factory, inaugurated a new cement plant, distributed 400 tractors, 239 tillers, and 710 motor pumps to increase agricultural production. Overall, the country's GDP has grown from approximately $18.8 billion US 3 years ago to $22.1 billion. There's been a very significant investment in infrastructural development. This includes new roads, widening existing ones, upgrading gravel roads with paved surfaces. There's a new state-of-the-art airport that is being built, as well as a number of affordable housing projects. Burkina Faso is also very invested in an information war, countering the imperialist propaganda, and is intent on, as much as possible, representing the gains of sovereign development. It is also very squarely situated itself on the path towards an ecological mode of development. It's launched its own line of electric vehicles. It's developed de-desertification projects, very much in line with Sankara's lineage, and it's invested in organic and sustainable agriculture. To conclude, I'd just like to say that Burkina Faso and Cuba recently celebrated 50 years of diplomatic relations. This was at the end of 2025. One of the most interesting things that came out of the commemoration was the recognition that Burkina Faso and Cuba's representatives are both interested in reigniting the forms of exchange that were operative under Thomas Sankara from 1983 to 1987. What this represents, if indeed they're able to do what they outlined, is a renewed kind of tricontinental spirit of South-South, solidarity, and the potential for developing an anti-imperialist project in an increasingly socialist direction. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Gabriel. Really excellent political analysis of the social and political basis of the emergence of these new political formations. Okay, now I think Miriam's successfully joined us, this time on her phone, and I think this should work out much better. So Miriam, the floor is yours.
I hope this one works. Can you hear me?
It's working. Thank you. Yeah.
Alhamdulillah. Thank you. Thank you so much again to Radhika and Comrade from the International Manifesto Group for having the Black Liberation Alliance to join you guys today. I'm really happy to share this panel with these amazing speakers, but mainly Nongo because he's Senegalese, but also because I love his work on the franc CFA. His book is amazing, and I will advise everybody to read it if you want to understand more how deep and how violent French imperialism is. My contribution going to be focused around the relationship between Senegal and the IOS. So yeah, to understand what is unfolding today in the Sahel, we must first confront a truth that is often erased. Senegal has never been separated from the Sahelian struggle. It has only been administratively separated. Under colonial rule, Senegal was not an isolated entity, but part of a broader system engineered by French Empire, linked to Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, and other through colonial federations. These territories was managed as a single imperial space designed to extract labor, resources, and obedience. The borders imposed during this period were not meant to reflect African realities, as we all know, but to fracture African power. What we now call states were instruments of imperial governance, serving imperial interests rather than local ones. In this sense, Senegal shares the same historical structure that the Alliance of the Sahel States is responding to today. The IOS is not inventing unity, it is recovering a memory that colonialism attempted to erase. So imperialism did not disappear with independence ceremonies, flags, or anthems. It reconfigured itself through military agreement, monetary mechanism like the franc CFA, like Gabriel and Nongo has mentioned, but unequal trade relations and corporate dominance. Senegal, like its Sahelian neighbors, inherited an independence shaped by conditions, political stability without full economic sovereignty, partnership without parity, and development without control. Although Senegal followed a distinct post-independence path marked by institutional continuity and relative political stability, the underlying constraints remain. Strategic sectors stayed externally dominated, monetary policy remained restricted, and economic decision-making was limited. As in much of the Sahel, cooperation within imperial system rarely translated into genuine empowerment. Today, the Sahel is openly rejecting this arrangement. Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger are articulating what many across West Africa have long understood. Sovereignty managed by others is not sovereignty at all. So from Senegal, this moment is observed with both caution and recognition. Many Senegalese do not view the IOS or Burkina Faso as reckless or irrational. Instead, they see defiance, dignity, and a refusal to be spoken for. This moment is inseparable from how Senegal's current leadership came to power, as Nongo said earlier. The rise of PASTEF, the party that led this revolution, was driven by sustained popular mobilization, especially among young people, against a political system seen as stagnant, externally aligned, and disconnected from social realities. The election of President Bassirou Diomaye Faye, carried by the vision of and struggle of Ousmane Sonko, marked a clear democratic rupture and a popular demand for sovereignty, accountability, and political renewal. Under Diomaye and Sonko, Senegal is playing a renewed regional role. Rather than acting as a proxy for external interests, the country has positioned itself as a mediator rooted in shared history and mutual respect with its neighbors. At the same time, Senegal is strengthening cooperation in security. We share borders with Mali, and our neighbors, regional trade and political coordination, recognizing that its future remained deeply linked to that of the Sahel more so than under the previous government. As this is the first time since when Jamai was elected, the first time ever in Senegal history, political history, is his first state visit was done to our neighbors in other African countries instead of to Paris. So the resonance of the Sahel resistance among Senegalese youth is no coincidence. It is a reflect of growing awareness that Africa stands as a crossroad, shaped by a multipolar world in which old hierarchies are being challenged and new alliances are emerging. Within this context, we understand that the IOS represent not a perfect blueprint, but a decisive political rupture with imperial management. In Senegal, young people have been politically emboldened by Pastef and the leadership of Ousmane Sonko, not only as a supporters, but as a political actors, evident in how a new generation is now visibly represented in parliament, in across leadership and governmental spaces, in sharp contrast to youth movement elsewhere that have been co-opted or diluted by imperial influence rather than transformed into real power. Senegal current progressive leadership occupies a complex position. Every time I talk about it, they ask me, oh, why Senegal is not joining the IOS, for example. So why is this not part of the IOS? It cannot ignore the significance of its message. So call for sovereignty, control over resources and equitable partnership echoes strongly within Senegal itself. The struggle unfolding in the Sahel mirrors Senegal's own unresolved question about economic autonomy. We have seen recently with our hidden debt by the IMF and some of the hard answers that we have to give to the World Banks and the IMF, the austerity measure they are trying to impose to the new Senegalese government, for example. So foreign influence and the limitation of heritage system, we do understand far too well. So what binds Senegal and the Sahel is not a uniform strategy, but a shared history and shared constraint. The same colonial logic that once grouped these territories for extraction now seeks to keep them divided for control. By insisting on African cooperation without imperial approval, the IOS directly challenged that logic. And this is why anti-imperialism in the Sahel matter far beyond the Sahel. It is part of the unfinished project of African unity. Pan-Africanism, as we have heard earlier, is not a nostalgia, it is a necessity. This new form of Pan-Africanism at best, because ECOWAS is not what we thought Pan-African, it's not what we think Pan-Africanism is. So from Dakar to Bamako, from Ouagadougou to Niamey, the question is no longer whether Africa should speak for itself, but whether it will be allowed to do so without punishment. So the answer emerging from the Sahel today is unmistakable. So, and Senegal, whether cautiously or boldly, is part of this historical moment. So yeah, thank you. And I'm looking forward to more discussion.
Thanks so much, Miriam. That was really great, a really ringing call for solidarity. Thank you so much. Coming from Dakar, that was really great. So now we will have some time for questions and answers. And while you are thinking of them, and please use the raise hand function, which you will find in your Zoom screen under the icon for React, which is usually a kind of heart-shaped symbol. If you click it, there will be a raise hand function. So please raise your hand. Meanwhile, let me just announce a couple of upcoming webinars. So the first is not exactly a webinar. It's a book launch for Jenny Clegg, whose book is called Storming the Heavens. And it's a book about the role of the peasantry. The subtitle is Peasants and Revolution in China, 1925 to 1949. I'm a good way into the book, and it's a really important read. I mean, this is based on decades of research and understanding. And I really hope that many of you can join us. It'll be a hybrid event. The live part of the event will take place at the Marx Memorial Library in London. So if you're in London, please consider coming in person. But if you are not, please join us by Zoom. It should be a really interesting conversation about what it's about is what gives China, what gives the People's Republic its staying power. I think this is what the question we'll try to resolve. And then that will be on the 14th. As one of us was quipping, it was a very romantic way of celebrating Valentine's Day. And then secondly, we will have a memorial for the remarkably prolific socialist and anti-imperialist writer Michael Parenti, who recently passed away, and that should be on the 21st of February. Our events are normally on Sundays, but this will be on a Saturday around the same time. Please watch out for the notices as they come through. Everybody who is on our list should have already received our email about Jenny's event, and you will soon receive an email about the other one. If you are not already on our list, please go to www.org and join our list. Sorry, www.internationalmanifesto.org and join our mailing list. You can also become a subscriber to our YouTube channel, which is the International Manifesto Group YouTube channel. Okay. There was one other thing I meant to say. Yes, if you like this video, please take the link. I can put it in the chat again, but please take the link and share it with all your friends, with your lists, on your social media. Okay, so I see that there is already one question, and I certainly have one of my own. So, and there are two questions, and I have one of my own. So we can certainly start the first round together. We will take 3 questions, and then we will take a round of answers from the speakers. And then if there are more questions, we will take another round. Certainly, we want to end this on the hour. Okay, so I see Christelle who has a question. And Christelle, I'm going to ask you to unmute, so you will be able to unmute yourself and pose your question.
Okay, thank you very much. My question is for Ndongo, but I mean, I'm open to other members on the panel answering as well. So I live here in Fiji, and we've cycled through various military leaders and military coups post-independence, and a lot of that has been centered around essentially capitulation to imperialism and capitalism, which has created huge losses in our resources, our human rights violations. I mean, you know, whenever we get our UPR reports back, there's always at least 200 or so issues that are highlighted. It's just been an ongoing reality for us here. So I was very interested to hear him speak about, and I've been observing this as well, how the military is very involved in the liberation movement in the Sahel. So I was just interested to know if there's anything in particular about their history, about what's happened there, that the military is actually pro-liberation as opposed to what we experience here being anti-liberation. Thank you.
Great question, Crystal. Thank you. Carlos, please go ahead.
Thank you, Radhika, and thanks to all the speakers, panelists, like really fascinating contributions. And I'm very glad that we're talking about a topic which is not sufficiently talked about. So, yeah, I was just thinking that what's going on in the Sahel really captures the zeitgeist to some degree of global politics as a whole, in terms of a sort of shift to a post-imperialist, to a multipolar world. You've got a group of states that are standing up to French and US neocolonialism, that also stand in solidarity with the people of Gaza, that are seeking to build positive relations with China, with Russia, with Iran, with other controversial countries. And, even though these states and leaders in the Sahel are being demonized in the Western media, that media seems to have lost a lot of its power, actually. Burkina Faso, Niger, Mali, are gaining popular support at home and among the diaspora and throughout Africa and globally, I think. And as Gabriel mentioned, Ibrahim Traoré in particular has become very widely recognized for his positions against imperialism, in favor of African unity, in favor of sovereignty, and in favor of state-led development. And in that, he's, as Gabriel said, very clearly channeling the legacy of Thomas Sankara, and it's resonating very loudly, and it's inspiring people. You know, anti-imperialism is gaining traction, Pan-Africanism is back on the agenda. And obviously, this is a pretty dangerous development for the strategists in Paris and in London and in Washington. So my question for the panelists is, how do you see this playing out? How do you see this developing? What levers do the imperialists have to try and roll back this tide? And how does our side respond to that? Thank you.
Great, Carlos, thank you. And I see another hand, Mohammed Essa. Please let me ask you to unmute. There you go. So you should be able to unmute and pose your question. Sorry, something is going wrong. Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Thank you so much. Great presentation by everyone. Just two thoughts running through my mind. So the first one is, I'm curious, why can't Ibrahim Traoré call his project? Why is he sort of reluctant to call his project a socialist one? I mean, if he takes direct inspiration from Sankara and is also closely sort of, collaborating with Cuba, I'm curious why that is the case. I mean, is it a tactic just to avoid more pressure than he and Burkina Faso already are under for the military coup label that they earned, and that he just doesn't want to add another label of socialism to the mix, which is then going to attract more pressure. So that's one question that I had. And the other one that I'm thinking is, if he takes direct sort of inspiration from Sankara and he openly talks about it, and there's all sorts of great reforms that Gabriel touched upon, and others have spoken about that are taking place over there in terms of sort of, macroeconomic things that are going on over there. But and I don't want to play identity politics over here, but just saying that, the sort of recent criminalization of homosexuality, and then, how does that kind of continue the legacy of Sankara, who was pretty much, he sort of initiated a lot of women's rights programs and got rid of a lot of crazy stuff that was going on over there in terms of specifically women's rights, if you speak. So just want to hear someone's thoughts about it. Anyone could really talk about it if they will. Thank you.
Okay, I don't see any other questions coming up, so I'm going to read one question that has just appeared on the Q&A, sorry, on the chat, and then pose my own question. So someone is asking, he said, or she, somebody, they said, I'm unable to come online and ask my question. So could you please ask it? The question is, following another attempt on the life of the president of Burkina Faso, it is reported that he has eliminated political opposition parties. I would like to hear the panel's thoughts on these recent developments. So if the panel could please say something about that. And then my own question, really, perhaps there are two. One is, if the panel could just throw, especially for an English-speaking audience, it might be interesting. I wonder if you could throw some light on what was the specificity of French colonialism that allowed for these kind of, well, I'm not saying that there weren't semi-colonial relations elsewhere. I mean, of course there were. So, but what was the specificity of French colonialism that allowed colonialism or neocolonialism or semi-colonialism to take the form that it did after in the post-Second World War period with the CFA and so on. So, like, why wasn't there more determined opposition? I mean, I can see that, I mean, there were some elements of opposition, but on the whole, they were able to impose this arrangement. And so if you can please speak about that. And the other one actually, yeah, relates directly to the question that was just posed, which is really about the political coloration. I mean, what do you think is the ideological climate in which these new governments are operating? What is what issues do they feel they need to prioritize? Why don't they use the language of socialism? And if they don't use the language of socialism, what do they use? What does patriotism consists of in these contexts today? So I guess that's a pretty full list of questions. I guess I'll just go in the same order in which they were received. I'd like to underline that I'd like everybody to feel free to address whatever question they like. I think while one or two were addressed at particular speakers, I'm sure all the speakers have insights into these questions. So let me begin with Ndongo. Ndongo, please feel free to answer any and all the questions you want to answer.
Thank you very much, Radhika. I enjoyed all the talks so far, and thanks also for the questions.
And sorry, if I may say, sorry to interrupt, I meant to say this earlier, but please also feel free to respond to one another. So all of those things are, yeah, thanks. Please go ahead.
Thank you. So I will try to answer the last question you raised about the specificity of French imperialism, neocolonialism. In fact, in contrast to, let's say, to Britain and other European powers, in France, there had been this idea of unified empire, where, the colonies would have some form of political participation. And from the French Revolution, in fact, because the French Revolution created this, with also the previous US Revolution, they created the political form we now call liberal democracy, but it was called elective aristocracy in the 19th century. So it's not democratic at all. But in fact, it allowed the colonies to participate to elections. When I say colonies, some sections of the colonies, for a long time, in fact, slavery interest, imperial interest, were allowed a voice in the French parliament. And this continued. In fact, in West Africa and so in Central Africa, there used to be people, elected and who would attend, at the French parliament. But most of those people, generally, they were loyal to French interests. And France, every time, would use elections to create its own elite. I would like to remind that elections and elite share the same grammatical roots. The elections are the procedure you use to create an elite. And France used the elections to create elites. And now all those, let's say, people, from the liberation movement, leftist organizations, etc., they were crushed. In Madagascar, they were crushed before, the end of World War II. In Cameroon, you had a very powerful nationalist movement, the UPC, Union des Populations de Cameroon. All of their leaders have been killed. Their most known leaders have been killed. And there have been a war waged against, the UPC and the bastions of UPC in Cameroon between 1956 to 1970s. Recently, there had been a French report documenting that more than 12,000 people have been killed, but this has been silenced. So that means that in the case of Francophone Africa, everything had been done to crush, leftist forces, nationalist forces, communist forces generally. That has been the story. So at the time of independence, most of those elites were really part of the French political system. For example, the Senegalese president, first Senegalese president, Senghor, he drafted even the fourth constitution of France. He was a minister, in the French government under the Fourth Republic. So that's why, you could see a difference with Sékou Touré, who was a trade unionist and who had a different kind of social base. Now about Crystal, your question about the military coups. In fact, most of the military coups have been reactionary against the people, to cement neocolonialism. But given that you could not use elections to elect progressive people, the only way anti-imperialists have found to come to power is through military coups. Now, in the 1970s, the military was heavily, politically ideologized to some extent. Most of those anti-imperialists were communist. Marian Gwabi in Congo, and also Thomas Sankara. They belong, for example, in the case of Thomas Sankara, to something called Rassemblement des Officiers Communistes, a gathering of communist officers, you see. So these people, they had an ideology, and they wanted to transform their states in a way that would be, socialist, etc. And that's one specificity. The other is also that the African continent is very young. The median age is 90 years old, you see. And in Francophone Africa, we have the oldest people in power. Paul Biya in Cameroon is 92 years old. In Congo, Sassou Nguesso, had been in power since the mid-1970s, except for a short break in the 2000s. Equatorial Guinea, same thing. So that means that these people have been serving, French neocolonialism by staying in power for more than 3-4 decades. So the only way, when you are young, when you look at the data, when you are young, and by young, I mean when you are less than 50, the only way you could have access to power is through, military power. That's what the data shows, you see. But now these young people, they would like to get rid of, Western imperialism, generally speaking. And some of the speakers talked about, all these mass movements, by young people against French military bases, against the CFA franc. So these young people, they see people like Ibrahim Traoré, like Assimi Goïta, as, representing their aspirations, because normally they would never be able to come to power through normal elections. See, I think that's also one other specificity. So the ideology now, I would say, is not necessarily socialism, anti-capitalism, but something we might call sovereigntism, in the sense that in the Francophone Africa, we are a bit backward in the sense that we don't have genuine decolonization, and this is happening now, in the Sahel. And so there is this push towards sovereignty. But that's not enough. We need more ideological content, because there are some contradictions. And I think one aspect that we should be wary of is the power of finance, international finance, because in the case of the Sahel, the AES, and Senegal, most of these young leaders, they are very popular. They came to power, but when they could not attack you, when they could not destabilize you politically, they could find a way to destabilize you financially speaking. We have a debt crisis in Senegal, and this has been nurtured to some extent by some forms of odious debt, given by international financial institutions to Senegal. And now you see, in the case of the country of the Sahel, they want to get rid of the CFA franc. They have created their own development banks, etc., but they have not, exited the CFA franc yet. And now what is happening is that they are borrowing, at very high interest rates and taxing heavily their population. This is a mistake, because that means that they are somehow having a kind of very conservative macroeconomic framework. And if you look, at the previous experience of Sankara also tried, to tax the people to try to fund some, basic, goods, etc., public goods. And at one point, this created resentment towards what could be considered at the middle class at that time. So that means that there is a need for these countries to have another, development model articulated on another, concept of money and finance. Because what they are doing for now, from an economic point of view, is not necessarily progressive. I'm meaning from the fiscal and monetary side, you see. In the case of Senegal as well, it's a bit similar. We have 132% debt to GDP ratio. Most of it is foreign debt. Yet the government commits to repay this debt, you see, and they say we don't want debt restructuring. So we have this type of contradictions, and I think that this could be a weakness for these governments. They really have to think differently, even if they are trying also to have other financial partnerships, but this has proved very difficult for now. But they have to make sure to devise an alternative financial model and get rid of the CFA franc ASAP. Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I was muted. Thank you, Ndongo. That was really great. Rob, you're next. Would you like to reflect on any of these questions?
Okay, well, I'll be brief because I'm not so well informed as others, and I'd certainly like to hear what Miriam and Gabriel have to say, and others. I suppose I would say when it comes to my limited dealings with the government people in Niger, the current government people in the military government people in Niger, is that people are aware of the socialist movement, and this is the answering the question about whether the military. I think it was Crystal who asked the question about whether the military was pro-socialist, and you, I think, also asked Radhika about the ideological climate of the military governments. And I have a sense that people inside the military government, the people that I communicate with, are aware of the history of socialism through this party was called Sawaba. Of course, they are also aware that it was, Ndongo's just been talking about the repression and the smashing of anti-imperialist and popular movements, and Sawaba was crushed utterly. And its crushing continues to sort of be something that's, it's not even represented in the education system. It's a whole kind of very difficult thing to talk about. So I feel that although people in the government are aware of this history and are interested in it, and I think that there are discussions about it, it's seen probably to take very much a sort of second place to the sovereignty issue, the national issue. When it comes to what, as Carlos said, what have the sort of imperialists got to offer? I they've got lots of things to offer, and Ndongo's talked about the finance and stuff, but I just note that actually with some work that I was doing a couple of years ago, I noted the Tony Blair Institute, which we would all probably be, and we're fairly familiar with what that is, and with what Tony Blair does and thinks, and the kind of stuff that he does he's hoping he can get to do in Gaza, etc., etc. The Tony Blair Institute saw the Sahel as a major target of, or a major, should we say, sort of arena of action for the imperialists or for the West in the coming period. And so I think that you can see, and this was just a report that his institute wrote a couple of years ago. But I think you can see that as being, very much a kind of situation that will continue. And I think the current stuff that's just happened in Niger this week, with on Friday night, I think it was, the Islamic State taking responsibility for an attack on the airport, and previously there being some kind of military attack near the presidential palace in Niamey. You can see that the forces of so-called jihadism, because there are all sorts of things going on with these violent with this insurgencies, and with other types of action and violence that are going on. I think that sort of indicates a new kind of a new sort of idea of what the Islamic State people may be looking to do there, and I can imagine there will be a lot more of that. It's also notable that I think the uranium that is in contest between Orano and the government is currently trapped at that airport. So I think that Niger looks like it may come under quite a sort of sustained assault in the very immediate coming future. Just finally, and this is just a small point really, I suppose I would say, on the issue of the specificity of French colonialism. I suppose, again, I'm speaking from a really lofty heights of ignorance here, but I suppose in the larger context of French imperialism, or world imperialism, we might say that the French Empire really faced the most formidable and ultimately successful anti-imperialist military movements that we know in history, which were in Algeria and in Vietnam. And in that period, and I think that kind of informed very much the way that France behaved through the 1950s. It had already been removed from Vietnam, and it was in the process, and it was having a very hard time through the 1950s in Algeria. So that, and ultimately, of course, left there in the early 60s. So, I feel that very much informs the way that France then took a very different and much more controlling approach to its former colonies in Africa, and I suppose elsewhere, especially in relation to how, for example, Britain behaved.
Really enlightening. Thank you so much, Rob. Miriam, would you like to go next? Miriam, are you there? Okay. Sorry. I must ask you to unmute. Sorry.
Yeah,
There.
sorry.
There.
I'm unmuted now. Thank you so much for the contribution from Nongo and Rob. I guess I'm gonna address, because I feel like most of it has been addressed, but the homosexuality question about how the yeah the decriminalization of homosexuality in Burkina Faso. I think like that goes without going to say, but we have seen how empire and has used homosexuality and gays' rights as a way to keep their knees on progressive governments that are trying to break the shackles of imperialism, trying to break the shackles of imperialism. We have seen it, for example, the word banks has been used on that. IMF has been used for that, or other ways of like, white saviorism being used as a way of or military intervention, even to the point where military intervention is being used. We have seen it, for example, in Nigeria, where Trump is thinking bombing villages is a way, which villages are bordered to Niger, by the way, recent bombing in Nigeria that is bordered to Niger in his way of saying, he's liberating Christians. But also, I think the cultural aspect of things shouldn't be overlooked either, is the fact that Burkina Faso is a Muslim country. Sadly, there is cultural stuff that come with that, identity stuff that come with that, but mainly the fact that, homosexuality, gay rights, and the concept of liberation has been used to weaponize against countries that are trying to break the shackle of imperialism. And I think we have seen it also with Palestine, with the pink washing that goes like, oh yeah, bombs are being dropped, but the bombs don't recognize whether this person is trans or gay, or this person is Muslims or Christians. Bombs are being dropped regardless, and they kill everybody else. And I think we shouldn't fall for that narrative of like, oh yeah, we shouldn't stop just to support the revolution that is taking place in those countries, or just because there is no gays' rights whatsoever. But it's a way also for them to resist the IMF and imperialism. I think that's the only thing I wanted to address, because everything else was kind of addressed, and I would like to hear more about Gabriel.
Great. Gabriel, please go ahead. Let me see. Yeah, you can unmute. Wonderful. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you all, and thanks for the rich questions. I'm just going to go through a few of them as quickly as I can. As far as what the imperialists have on offer, it's a nonstop hybrid war that is economic, military, political, cultural. I believe there's been at least 17 assassination attempts against Ibrahim Traoré. And one of the other elements I think we have to be attentive to, Said Bouamama, I think, is excellent on this, is that as the French imperialists lose their grip, increasingly the UAE, Saudi Arabia, as well as Qatar have been investing economically in West Africa. And that comes with economic strings and, as Ndongo was referencing already, serious problems for the potential viability of the project moving forward. And one of the things that is key, of course, to all of these projects is not just political independence, but economic sovereignty. And that, I think, should absolutely be one of the focal points. Regarding whether or not Traoré is a socialist, should be a socialist, should declare Burkina Faso socialist, I think that there are major similarities and differences with Sankara. Sankara, of course, was radicalized as a Marxist in reading groups in the wake of '68 and got directly on board with a kind of global project in that regard. Traoré is clearly channeling that tradition. And if you listen closely to his speeches, he'll often say things like, we cannot yet tell everyone what it is that we're doing. We cannot lay out our plans because we don't want everybody to know them. And at moments like that, you might hope that it's a little bit like Cuba between 1959 and the Bay of Pigs, when Castro was not saying that it was a socialist revolution. It was only after the Bay of Pigs that he, described everything that they were doing and then said, well, retroactively, this has a word, and it is socialism. There is the possibility of going in that direction, but there are also certain, more conservative elements, just picking up on some of the discussion around LGBTQ rights. 33 of 54 African countries have criminalized homosexuality in various ways, but for some reason, you only hear about Burkina Faso. And so I think it is clear that they're weaponizing the culture war against the class war. But you can, at one and the same time, recognize what they're doing and also set the strategic horizon of your struggles in a direction that recognizes that, well, anti-imperialism needs to be first and foremost. It is the primary contradiction, but we also need the liberation of all peoples, regardless of race, nationality, gender, sexuality, etc. And so you can have internal criticisms of an ongoing project, while not allowing that to short circuit the class war by a culture war. Regarding the elimination of the opposition, I think Ndongo was great on this. You can't have a bourgeois democracy function in an imperialist world in which bourgeois democracy will simply produce the best puppet government that imperial money can buy. What you need is a sovereign project of democratic empowerment that re-educates the people, puts institutions and power in their hands, and then develops the mechanisms by which you can have a more substantive democracy, meaning a democracy that's controlled by the people, not by foreign meddlers. And so I think it makes sense to understand that there are different stages to that process, and that right now just having an opposition funded by imperialist powers, you're going to be in much the same situation as many other governments who have tried to do that around the world have been in. The last thing that I would say is concerning the CFA franc. This was established with Bretton Woods in 45, and it was a very explicit endeavor to undermine the sovereignty of African countries. At the same time, you have to recognize that the anti-fascist war didn't end in 45. It was only halted by the colossal defeat of fascism on the part of the Soviets and the Chinese within the kind of European and part of the Asian war theater. In Africa and in Southeast Asia, it continued, and in Latin America, unabated. And the struggle against fascism was the struggle against colonialism. And so one of the things that the French did, including on Liberation Day, I believe it was May 8th, 1945, is they massacred some 45,000 Algerians who had understood that the anti-fascist war is the anti-colonial war, and therefore the war against Nazism should be a continued war against the Western imperialist powers, including the French imperialist powers. And what did the French do? They crushed them, and they mobilized civil society. They armed French colonizers. They bombed and just bloodlet, sending a strong message. They did the same thing in Madagascar and in other places across the African continent, that the Africans need to line up, otherwise they will be crushed. And so the repressive war went hand in hand with the economic war, and it's those two elements that allowed among others, that allowed them to advance their agenda. So in short, Radhika, there was a lot of pushback, but it was unfortunately quashed by the French military. I'll leave it at that and turn it back to you, though.
Thank you. That was really also very enlightening, in addition to what the others said. Now, I have one last question, and given I'm a very indulgent chair, I'm going to indulge it and give you all one brief moment to respond to it, and then we will close. So Merle and Steve, if you would please like to put your question. I'm asking you to unmute. What's happening? Yeah, okay. Oops. Okay, I've asked you to unmute. It should show up in a second. There.
Yeah, can you hear me? So
Yes.
yeah, I guess my question goes to Ndongo. I just wonder by what means is there hope of getting out from under the CFA franc and replacing it with a sovereign currency?
Okay, thank you. Ndongo, why don't you start, and then I will see if anybody else wants to add anything to it.
Okay. Yeah, I think, normally if you would like to exit from the CFA franc, they are part of a monetary union, and there's an article in the monetary union treaty that says that any country could leave it. And I think that generally people fear, kind of sabotage, sanctions, etc. But I think they are, either over exaggerated, because now we are in a multipolar world and you could, plan your transition very well to a new currency for the AES countries, and you could, rely on external partners like, for example, China, Russia, etc. Maybe they are planning, to exit the CFA franc. I don't know. But the one thing that is not a good news is that, recently there was an article by the Financial Times saying that the Burkina Faso has entered into a joint venture partnership with investment fund based in Abu Dhabi in the Emirates. And this investment fund has shares in the cryptocurrency company by the Trump family. And now with Burkina Faso, they will issue stable coins, and the collateral will be Burkina Faso's gold and mining assets. I think this is a terrible. I don't know whether this is confirmed, you see, but this is in the financial media news, you see, and this has not been, refuted by the Burkinabe authorities. And I think this would be a move worse than being in the CFA franc, because this does not answer the criticism of sovereignty. That's why I think that these countries need some form of intellectual support, because most of the intellectuals are very shy, saying that we are not going to advise, military regimes, purchase, etc. But I think they should take this financial matter very, 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 very seriously. Otherwise, they could make, mistakes, that will have, profound impact on their liberation project.
Oh, that is such a shocking piece of news. Thank you for telling us about it, Ndongo. Anyone else would like to respond? I'll go in the same order. Rob? No. Miriam? No. Okay, so that's great. I think we have had an amazing discussion, ending with an amazing revelation, which Ndongo has just made, which was all going to make us worried. And I think that does show that while it's perfectly understandable that new generations will name their projects with new names, some sort of continuity with liberationist projects from the past may not be such a bad thing as providing what some people might call, an orientation, if one may say, in an extremely bewildering world. But anyway, who are we to say? I think you are right, Ndongo, that that these governments need some intellectual leadership. And I can't, by the way, think of anyone else on the CFA question who is more qualified than you. So perhaps maybe they will listen to our webinar and consult you perhaps. I hope so very much. Anyway, as you can see, the International Manifesto Group and the Critical Theory Workshop, who have jointly co-sponsored this webinar, bring you some really interesting discussions. Please, if you like them, share them, talk about us. Please, let's make sure that more and more people can hear these amazing intellectual contributions. Thank you very much for coming. To you all, the audience, thank you particularly to our brilliant speakers. And I'm sure this issue is not going to go away. We will be holding another one soon. I should add one last point that I should have said earlier, which is that we had another speaker, Fanny Pigeot. She was not able to be here through incompetence of mine, I'm sorry to say, but this has something to do with the fact that, as Gabriel pointed out, we have been planning this for a long time, and somewhere along the way, I assumed that somebody else was inviting her, and we actually failed to invite her. So she was she was not available at the last minute. So, but we hope to have her on another time. So thank you, everyone. I'm going to take a couple of minutes to save various chats and everything, but this is the end of the webinar. So thanks, everyone, for coming. Thanks to the speakers. Thanks to Critical Theory Workshop. And yeah, goodbye.
Thank you very much.
How do I save the chat? Chat. Here we are. Chat. Save chat. state.